Welcome to the Seek Wisdom podcast, where we talk with others who love Jesus about wisdom and the faith. I'm your host, Nehemiah, and today our guest is Sydney Zuehlke. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So for those watching and listening at home, they probably don't know this. Maybe some people do, but we're homies. We've known each other for a long time.
Yes.
You're my wife's best friend.
Yep.
And so this is super honor to have you on because not just that we're friends, but I look up to you in our faith as well. So
I look up to you as well.
I appreciate that. But for people who don't know your spiritual credentials, so to speak, could you just give some background on, why we might want to talk about this today? Don't be too humble. Tell me about your background with your education and with your experience and stuff like that.
Okay. I feel like it should be such a simple answer to this question, but it's a little more complicated. So I grew up Lutheran, and knew a lot about the Bible, a lot about church, about how to be a good Christian, and all of that. And then in high school, I started going to a youth group, which is where I really encountered the Lord and learned about relationship, learned about Holy Spirit, learned about what it's like to have a relationship with God versus just believe that God exists. And through that experience, I spent a lot of time in youth group, which was really, really beneficial for me. It kept me out of trouble in high school for sure.
Fair enough.
And then through that, I had the opportunity to go to a Bible college, and I got to study the Word there, which was really awesome. It definitely taught me the scholarly side of understanding and actually taking time to dive into the Word, and give more context, things like that. Fortunately, my experience with the school didn't end positive.
Sure.
And I had a couple of years where I really had to figure out if my faith was my own or if I was borrowing it from others. I think that was something I've always kind of struggled with because I've always been in crowds and rooms where everybody else had faith, and it was really easy for me to borrow it from them.
Fair enough.
And I had a lot of challenges in my life, a lot of loss and a lot of hard things where I really had to lean on the Lord in those moments. And so that was what made my faith my own. But it was easy to forget when it felt like my entire world was falling apart.
Right.
And I think in that time, I spent a lot of time trying to figure out whether or not I believed God was good. And fought a lot with I know God is real. I've seen him in so many things. And I've seen miracles and I've seen all of these things happen that are just inexplicable without the Lord.
Right.
I knew he was real, but I was really struggling to understand how a good God could let something like that happen with his people and in that realm. And so I spent a lot of time fighting that, and I think that really made my faith my own because it was no longer something I was borrowing from anybody else around me. I didn't have my whole spiritual community was in free fall.
Right.
So I didn't have anyone to lean on or to borrow from in that time, really, at least not in my proximity. I was also during COVID, so it was everybody's isolated. And so in that time, I was really able to, it took a long time. This wasn't a couple of days figuring this out. This was a year or two long process of making some really bad choices and getting into a really dark place and having to turn back and being all right, I know the Lord is good. I know that he is real. And I know that the most freedom I've ever felt is when I am living in accordance to the will of the Lord and abiding in him. And so I had to kind of readjust. And since then, I've had the opportunity to live in Thailand doing missions. I did some missions in Panama for a little bit. I've done a lot of short-term mission trips, but I lived in Thailand the year doing anti-trafficking and working with missions organizations there. Have an incredible Thai mom who really guided me and had some really incredible team members come from the States that really helped guide my faith. I was baptized for the first time as an adult. Honestly, I was baptized as an infant.
Sure.
But the first time in my faith where I chose it for myself.
Yeah.
And that was really pivotal for me because it was a moment of this is actually my faith and moving forward. I want to represent Jesus in that was that. And then since then, we're just rocking it out,
Vibing.
Vibing.
I love that. Well, I think it's cool that you kind of went through the popular, in a way, popular story right now of like deconstruction. But I feel like a lot of times people go through that deconstruction phase and then that's kind of the last you hear of their faith journey. And it sounds like that's not your story. And you deconstructed and you were like, no, this is legit. This is
Yeah.
what I want to do. This is how I want to live my life. And you've helped women in trafficking situations. You've gone to different countries and helped a lot of different people. I think that's really cool. So thank you for doing that, by the way. Before we get into our main topic for today, I also wanted to ask you about your life verse. And so could you tell me what that is? And could you tell me how you let that impact the way that you live your life?
Yeah. So it's John 8:31 and 32. So if you abide in my word, you are my disciples, and you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. When I was in the Lutheran church, we had to pick a verse for our confirmation.
Sure.
And it's something that has always stuck with me. And I wanted to just pick, like, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. And I remember my pastor pulling me aside and being like, kind of need the other part, like, you abide in my word, you'll be my disciple. Like, you kind of need the other part for that to, like, really, you don't just get to, like, know the truth and be free.
Right,
Like,
right.
you kind of got to do something for it. So he made me choose the other half, and that's been very pivotal for me, because I've found so much in my life when I am not abiding in the word, it's just way more chaotic. Like, there's just a grounding that comes when you're abiding yourself in the word, and you're abiding in the word, and you're finding yourself, like, living in accordance to that. And that's truly when the freedom comes, because it's one thing to know it. Like, you hear the saying a lot, like, even the devil knows scripture. And so it's a different thing to abide in it and, like, live that out.
Yeah.
And I think for me, I often get caught up in the busyness of life. And right now I'm in grad school and working full time and trying to maintain a social life, see my friends and my family. And so everything's adding up. And a lot of times it's easy for that to go on the back burner, especially when I'm reading 35 pages of a textbook a day.
Right.
I don't really feel like reading anymore. So it's easy for me to push that aside, but I really find that I'm most grounded and most living in accordance to what I feel like my calling is. And just in accordance to, like, what a disciple of the word looks like if I'm actually abiding in the word. So,
Well, that's sick.
yeah.
I love that. It's inspiring. And honestly, for me, like, a good challenge too, because I'm not in grad school, but I'm running my own business and
And you've got 2 children,
Right.
a wife.
right. So it's a similar-ish thing, for me too, to let it go to the back burner. And so I think that that's an inspiration for me to abide in the word a little more, and to, not that I'm never reading, but I definitely could do better. And I think that I also feel the most grounded and chill, sane
No.
when I'm spending time with God. And so, yeah, thanks for sharing that. That's
Yeah,
good.
of course.
So the main topic that I want to talk to you about today is kind of with your background in missions, but also like how maybe that perspective gives you a different view on daily life faith stuff. So I have a few questions that I wrote down for you. The first one is, as someone who has traveled the world, and who has gone to different countries doing missions work, some local, I'm sure, as well. I wanted to ask you about evangelism and the importance of impacting others for Jesus in your inner circle, your everyday life, your work life, stuff like that. So, I guess it's three different parts that I wanted to ask you about. So, if you don't mind, I want to flip it a little bit. I think I do kind of want to start with the worldly or with going out into the world.
Okay.
So, as someone who, you grew up in the church, you grew up with people around you. Was your family Christian growing up too? Like,
Yeah.
Okay. So, you grew up in a Christian family, you're around Christians all the time. Talk to me a little bit about the conviction that you had to go out into the world. Why do you think that that's so important? Do you think that that's for everybody? I'm sure your perspective might be different than the common church person who maybe hasn't been called to go out into the world directly. Do you think that it is an everybody thing? Why was it for you? I don't know. Talk
Okay.
about that a little bit.
You said like the conviction part. I feel like for me it wasn't a conviction.
Okay.
Like I think for me it wasn't like I feel like this is a calling and I need to like live it out. I think it was I had the opportunity to go on a mission trip and I just fell in love.
Okay.
And I don't know that even I think through the years of doing missions, I think I fell in love for maybe some not so correct reasons, if that makes sense. Like
Okay.
I love traveling. I love experiencing new cultures. I love helping people. Uh, and I've always been told like I'm wired for missions, and I think that in a sense that's true, because I am naturally wired to love those things. But I think at first it was more so like I was just so enthralled in like the idea of like just getting to go and help people in a different culture, in a different um, part of the world even was just like so I was just so in awe of the aspect of doing that. And then I think as I grew in my faith, the idea of evangelizing and like spreading the gospel became more important to me because I wanted other people to experience the freedom that I had found and understand the love that I came to understand and what a relationship with the Lord can look like. And I think too, because I had such a different perspective growing up in a Christian household versus like what an actual relationship with the Lord was like, I needed to or I wanted people to understand the same perspective that I had found because I found so much freedom in that.
Right.
Like God isn't this big angry man in the sky that wants to tell you all the things you're doing wrong. Um, and as far as doing missions and like the calling to that, I mean, I think like, you know, the Bible says go and make disciples of all nations. But I feel like I have interpreted that verse a little bit like less so like go out to the nations. I don't think that means buy a ticket, Thailand tomorrow, sorrow your stuff. And I think that's a common thing that like when you feel a call to missions, that's what you want to do. And I think some people are called to do that. But I think one of the coolest parts of missions that I found is making disciples so that they can go to their own community. Especially with short-term missions and things like that. It's like I don't want to be the savior because I'm not. I'm not coming in to save you.
Right.
And I'm coming to offer you something to help you find freedom for yourself. And with that, like I find it such an honor that the Lord like brings us into those moments, but He really doesn't need us for that.
Right.
And so I think my biggest thing with that verse is making disciples. Like Jesus had His 12 people that He walked with the whole time. He went to the nations with His 12. And so I think the call to make disciples is more so to find your people that you want to raise up so that they can go find their people to raise up. And that then spreads to the nations. And so I don't necessarily think that like, yeah, you need to buy a ticket. I don't think everybody is wired for that. And I think that that's okay. And I think that you got to find your place to disciple other people. And yeah,
Cool.
I'm trying to think if there was any other elements that I,
Yeah, I don't want to cut
No.
you off, but
yeah.
that was great. No, I think that's really good. I think I love the thought of find your people to raise up so that they can find their people to raise up. I think that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I also loved how you talked too about like, I'm not the savior. God doesn't need me. I think that sometimes we get caught up in it, maybe for good reasons in theory, like, oh, I gotta go because God has called me and He needs to use me. And I think He wants to use us,
Yeah.
which is why He does at all.
Right.
But I agree with you, like, He totally doesn't need to. And so, like, the thought of going and doing missions, even short term, just to like equip people to find salvation on their own, that's a really cool perspective. I've never heard that. So that's really cool. And I think that I'm sure you're going to get into this a little bit, but that can be applicable to your inner circle and to your family, to
Yeah.
your coworkers, and so I think that's really applicable. So that's good. I'm kind of shifting a little bit from the plan here, but I kind of want to ask you, that maybe your answer there, I think, kind of speaks to the not needing to think so intensely about the going out part. But for those who have been called into that, could you maybe speak a little to maybe someone who feels like they're called into that and they're freaked out? They feel this like overwhelming weight of like responsibility or of like fear, maybe, you know? Could you maybe speak to the good side? Like, could you speak to the encouragement? Maybe even speak into that responsibility a little bit. Maybe that you've dealt with at all. Could you maybe give an encouragement to someone like that?
Yeah. I think that responsibility, that weight you feel, you have to surrender and just be like, this is not my weight to carry. I think a lot of times, again, it's like not thinking that you're the savior. Like,
Right.
if you don't go out, like the Lord is still gonna reach that person if that's what he wants. Like, he doesn't need you to do that. Like, it's an honor and a privilege. And I think reframing it to be like, it's an honor that the Lord will use me in this way instead of it's my responsibility to do that. I think that brought me a lot of peace. And like, if I think also with living overseas and doing overseas missions, there's a whole level of like learning a different culture and like balancing kingdom culture with not going counterculture to the culture you're ministering to, I guess, and learning to accept certain things that are not that important, and learning to balance those things is really hard, because you have this burden that you feel, that's responsibility, but you just have to, I guess, learn to just surrender it and do what you can. And again, just abiding, like if you're surrendered to the Lord and like what he has for you, then it's a lot easier to walk without carrying that burden. I think too, just like knowing that in other cultures, like when you're living overseas, there's going to be hard days, and you just have to accept that there's going to be hard days. I mean, there's going to be hard days if you're living at home, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's always hard days no matter where you are. Sometimes those hard days just feel really, really hard. And just like, am I making the right decision? Like, I'm so far away from my family. I'm so far away from my friends. I'm missing things. And something I had to learn was like, I'm not missing out. Like, I'm gaining a different opportunity. And like those people and those things and those places will still be there when I come back. I just have to like be thankful for the opportunity that I currently have to be here. And yeah, the privilege that it is to get to do that, because not everybody gets to. And I think too, like, if you feel like the burden to go, you just have to be obedient, because there's going to be so much that comes from that obedience. And I think trusting that like your own relationship with the Lord and your own discernment and being obedient in that will always, even if it's hard, like you gain so much from it. Like, even there were some of the hardest days I've ever lived was when I was in Thailand. Like, the loneliest, like the hardest, like I missed funerals, I missed birthdays, I missed weddings, and like some of those days were the loneliest days I've ever felt, but I also felt so fulfilled in being there. And then knowing that like I was, one, being obedient to where like the Lord had called me to be, and then also two, like just the opportunity. I felt so privileged to have the opportunity to be there, because not everybody gets to do that. So I think it's just a lot of reframing, honestly.
Well, that's really cool. I love that. I think that the chunk about you're not missing out, you know, I think that's something that you could apply even to not missions. Like, there's stuff in my life right now where I'm like, because I went to Seattle for 4 years on God's call, I am now currently going through things, rebuilding my business, rebuilding my life back in Wisconsin for this first year, where I'm like, we should be further ahead, or we should be whatever. And I feel like
Comparison game.
sometimes I feel like I missed out, or am now missing out, because I should be whatever. But I'm getting different opportunities, you know, and I got different opportunities while I was doing ministry in Seattle. And I think that perspective shift is good, even if you're not doing ministry somewhere else. If you're a dentist in your hometown,
Right.
like, there's going to be moments where you feel like because of said circumstance, I'm missing out or whatever. Maybe I should have been an artist or maybe whatever. And I think that if you're following the right path and you know deep down that you are, that you're not missing out. You're gaining different opportunities. And
No,
I think that's a good perspective.
I
So,
think that's really true.
cool. The next thing I want to ask you about is kind of more your inner circle every day. I'm going to kind of merge those two things, but like whether it be a coworker, whether it be a family member, I kind of want to talk about both sides of this here, but I think on the one hand, there's a balance with talking to other people about Jesus in your family, at your workplace. I think on the one hand, if all you're doing is shoving Jesus down their throat, that's probably not the right way to go about it.
I would agree.
But I also think that if all you're doing is trying to act like Jesus would, and you're never actually talking about Jesus directly, you're also doing them a disservice as a Christian.
Right.
If you're never bringing it up, you're going out of your way to just be nice. I think there's a lot of non-Christians who are nice.
Yeah.
And so I would love to hear your perspective. Let's start with that one, because I think oddly that one's a little more controversial and challenging to talk about.
Yeah.
Let's
I would
talk
say
about
so.
yeah, let's talk about the actual like directness. When do you think is the right opportunity? How do you know it's the right opportunity? And like, how do you go about that? How frequently? Like, as someone who has, was raised Christian, as someone who's kind of maybe ran away from the faith for a little bit or deconstructed or however you want to, say that.
Runaway is good.
Yeah. I'm not trying to put words in your
No.
as someone who's kind of done both, so
Yeah.
to speak, now in your current stage of your faith, how do you feel about that? Does that make sense?
Yeah. That's a good question. I feel like I have a layered answer. I think right now I work at a mental hospital.
Okay.
And in mental health, and I'm getting my degree in clinical mental health counseling. In that field, in general, there's a line that you have to toe very carefully. And I think there is a way to bring it up and have those conversations, but it also has to be ethically balanced in the profession. And that's something I'm currently trying to figure out. How do I do that? Like with my coworkers, I can't really do that with residents. Like I'm literally not allowed to.
Sure.
In a lot of ways. If they bring it up with me, I can respond, but I can't necessarily bring that up. And with my coworkers, a lot of them are very anti-church, very anti-Christian. And I'll admit, I'll be honest, a lot of times I do fear away from those conversations. I have since talked to certain coworkers and kind of opened up about that, and I found, it's easier to talk to the people who are Christian about it than it is necessarily to talk to the people
For
who
sure.
aren't.
And that's not just you.
Yeah.
That's all of us, right?
Yeah. But I think too, there is a level of modeling. But I think what you said is really true. A lot of Christians would be like, oh, I love like Jesus. I'm like living like Jesus. But like we forget that Jesus flipped tables. Jesus wept with people. Jesus, like there were actions behind the love that Jesus had for people and how he loved people. And it wasn't just accepting everything blindly. He stood up and spoke, he talked about his father. There were actions and things that he did that, like, if we're gonna say we're modeling our life after Jesus, we also have to model after those things as well. And that's a conviction I have very often, where it's like, it's really easy to love like Jesus. It really, really, like, for me, at my core, it's so easy to love like the Lord and just like love everybody kind of like, honestly, unconditionally is pretty easy for me. I would say that that's something that I don't really struggle with. But I think the part that I find hard is those actions of speaking up, those actions of bringing it up, of being direct. Jesus was direct. He did not mince words. He did not, and like, he was not like, oh, maybe if you want to, or like, like my Father in heaven, like maybe we could talk about him kind of thing. Like, he was like, nah, this is the truth. Like, you will know it, or
Yeah, sure.
So I think having to find that balance of, okay, I want to love like Jesus. I want to model my life after Jesus. What does that actually look like in practically? And I think I have a lot of space to grow with my coworkers and other people in my inner circle. But I also want to make sure that like I'm, again, modeling like Jesus in that way, even just in the loving them well. I think that's a good first step, even though like there is stuff that needs to follow that.
Yeah.
I do think that is a good first step, because I think if you're living a life that is not honoring to the Lord, or is counter to like how Jesus would have lived in that circle or circumstance, then like when you do bring it up, it's a lot harder to have, you know, the respect of that, or like the
Well, yeah,
get.
I was gonna ask you, almost kind of going into that, like, talk to me now about someone who maybe has that flipped. And I think that it's less common, but I'm sure that there's some people who are like, no, I have no problem bringing up
Yeah.
Jesus, but I struggle with swearing, or I struggle with drinking too much, or maybe for some people, it's the bringing up Jesus isn't the hard part. It's the loving like Jesus or the living like Jesus part. So could you maybe go a little deeper into that, of like the importance of challenging yourself to live up to the standards that the Bible holds us to, and how that can maybe make an impact on people, or make an impact if you're not doing it,
Yeah.
when you actually bring up Jesus to someone?
Yeah, I think it's all about like if somebody tells you, you know, how good coffee is, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, this coffee is so good. Like you have to try this coffee," but they've never tried it, they don't like coffee. I'm like, "Why would I respect
Right.
their opinion?"
Or if they
Coffee.
drink Folgers every day at
Yeah,
work.
right. Like 100%. Like, you know, like, or somebody who's like, oh, you know, like the idea of like mansplaining, like somebody is explaining something to you that you clearly know like more about. And then you're like, I have a whole degree in this. How are you going to explain this to me? I think it just like reduces your credibility. And yeah, if somebody's talking to you about something they clearly are living counter to, like, I'm not going to respect your opinion on that. Like, I don't want to listen. If you're living in a way that is not loving towards others, or I see you discriminating against somebody, or I see you talking to somebody differently, or I see you like hating this person or talking about this person like that, like and you're talking to me about like the love of the Lord, and you're talking to me about Jesus and all of this stuff, I'm going to be like, yeah, okay. Like that doesn't seem like something I want.
Right.
And I think that, yeah, you have to live up to the, like, it's a responsibility to, there is a certain weight to being somebody who is going to represent the Lord. Like if you're going to do that, like you kind of want to carry that well. It's, at least I do, it's something that I want to carry in a way that is honoring, and not something that like, I don't want to do Jesus dirty, you know?
Yeah.
Like I don't want to do his name dirty and just be like that person that, you know, yeah, makes him look bad, I guess. And so I think a lot of it has to be like a heart check for you too. Like if you don't have an issue bringing up Jesus, but you do have all of these things that are like detrimental to like being a good representation of what it looks like to have a relationship with him, then say you probably need to, you know, do some inner work first before you try to bring other people into it, I guess. So yeah.
Yeah, that's fair. The last thing I wanted to ask you about too, I love what you said about living like Jesus. Could you maybe give any sort of encouragement, maybe based on what you've done in the past, or how you at least attempt to? Because like, I don't think either of us are perfect at either of these. You know, we're not claiming to be, but
No.
could you maybe give an encouragement to someone who maybe is struggling with this, or maybe they're a new Christian, or maybe they aren't either of those things, but in regards to, we talked a lot about the responsibility, but maybe the joy of the responsibility. Like, I think that when I have spoken to someone directly about Jesus, God honors that in my heart. I might be sweating like crazy at the end of it. I might be a little shaky when I get back in my car after that conversation. But I feel like God fills me with so much joy and so much like knowledge that I've honored him. And so could you maybe just give like a final encouragement to someone in regards to evangelism at whatever level, to whoever it may be? Yeah, could you do that?
Yeah. Um, yeah, I think there's a certain level of like you said, like joy that like you receive from being obedient. I think it's like, I think I've seen it mostly in like the life change that follows. I don't know that it's ever been like very immediate for me. I think I have more of an overthinking, like, oh my gosh, did I mess that up? Did I do something wrong? Should I have said something differently? I think I more so lean to that extreme where I don't feel like a relief after or like
Fair
a
enough.
joy after. But I think that the joy for me is coming from like seeing some of the life change that has come from that. Especially like in Thailand, just seeing like how lives can completely transform and turn around when they experience that type of freedom and that type of love. And I think also like I have to remind myself in other situations where it's not an immediate return or you don't get to see the process that like there was a seed planted. I was just talking about this last night actually, where it's like there were so many times where like we had to send them back to the darkness, not knowing if anything impacted. Like you never hear if that seed planted ever grew, you know? Maybe it didn't, maybe it did, I'll never know. But having to just like trust the Lord in that. And there's a certain peace that comes in. It's again not my responsibility and not something that like I ever really had control over. Again, the joy comes from the opportunity to be used in that and having to remind myself, even if it went poorly, like maybe you get cussed out, you know, or maybe that person is angry, maybe that person never talks to you again, never trusts you again, because that definitely can happen as well. But knowing that one, I was obedient and that the joy that comes from that, and then also the seed planted, like I'll never know. And I've heard stories of I thought this person would never, and the seed I planted, I didn't even know I planted it. And I didn't even know, like, I think about the story of like a summer or winter camp one time where there was a kid that I was beefing with, and he was just causing chaos everywhere, every turn. And I was really trying to like step up and be a leader, and I didn't do that in the kindest of ways a lot of times. It was very direct, very burnt out. And there was a moment during worship where he was like, if you have that girl come over and pray for me, like I'll believe you're real. And I'm up there worshiping, having my little time with the Lord, and he's like, go pray for this person. Go pray for this person. I'm like, no, I don't want to talk to this. I don't even want to be near this person. I don't even want to breathe the same air as this person right now. He is irritating me so much. And I was like, he was in an inconvenient spot. I was like coming up with all the excuses. Like somebody else will go pray for him. And in his mind, he's praying, if you call if this person comes and prays for me, I will believe you're real.
Like he's saying that to God.
Yeah. Yeah. And I finally was just like, I guess, like, I couldn't get it out of my head. And so I went over, I literally went like this and prayed for him. I didn't even look him in the eye. And I walked away. And like 2 days later, we had the testimony and I watched him change, like at the camp. Like things changed. Like he was more active. He was participating. He was like behaving more or less. And he was invested. And I was like, oh, that's so cool. Like I had no idea that I had that moment even happened.
Right.
And then they speak at testimony night and they're like, yeah, this girl came over and prayed for me. And I said, like, if that person comes over, and I was like, that's so cool. Like, and I was so thankful in that moment that I got to see, you know, the full circle. And I got to be there for his baptism. I wonder where he is now and what he's doing now. I hope he's good. But yeah, like I got to see that moment come full circle. And we don't always get those moments, but those moments kind of keep you going. And so there will be those moments, and I think the Lord is really kind to like let you into those moments, especially when you need that encouragement and you feel like, you know, like I'm not doing anything, nothing I'm doing is making a difference. I think the Lord is really kind to like to honor that. So
Cool.
that makes sense.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. I feel very encouraged by that. I think God does do that though, where you in your obedience, and you know, not every time, but you in your obedience sometimes wonder. And I think that when you're obedient, God is faithful to sometimes give you a little inside scoop on
Yeah.
how your obedience impacted the kingdom for good. And that is really cool to think about and to experience. And so, yeah, that's definitely a very good encouragement, even to me, to encourage me to speak out more, because I think that when God calls me to do something or to speak to somebody, like you said, you never know what impact you're going to have. And honestly, even if you don't have an impact, the obedience really is enough. And I think that that's a good encouragement. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, of course.
Cool. Well, if you guys want to hear more from the Seek Wisdom podcast, we are on all the platforms. We have the audio going on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. We have the long form video of this podcast and all the others that we've done on YouTube. And then I also do short form content on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube Shorts. Trying to be everywhere. So definitely check out Seek Wisdom podcast on all the platforms. And that's pretty much it. So thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you guys next time.
Like and subscribe.
Like and subscribe.